Welcome to Ahead of the Game, a Sport Buff podcast featuring leaders in the sports technology and sports broadcast world. I'm your host, Sarah Buck, and today's guest is Rebecca Hopkins, CEO of the STA Group and a founding partner of Sightline Ventures. Rebecca is a sports communications specialist and entrepreneur with over 20 years sector experience. A regular TV pundit about sports business, Rebecca has also served on the advisory board for Loughborough University's Business School, the International Sports Technology Association, and she's guest lectured on the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Rebecca Hopkins, how are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today.
It's brilliant to have you and hear your insight. I always like to kick episodes off with some quick fire questions. So, ready to test you. First one is, when are you most productive?
Oh, in the mornings, particularly after a cup of tea.
Lovely. Favourite sport?
Rugby.
These are quick, I love it. Who and what inspires you?
Oh, goodness. I really get a kick out of working with the brains that we encounter working in sport in the sector that we do. It's just a joy every day to be hearing what people at the bleeding edge, the cutting edge of the world of sports tech are doing. And if you're somebody who's naturally curious, it's just so exciting to hear what they're doing on almost a daily basis.
Advice you'd give your younger self?
Don't try and boil the ocean.
I've not heard that one before. I like
it's where
it.
You just try and do so much so fast, and get a bit frustrated when it's not happening, and just sometimes take a pause and breathe, and just it doesn't all have to be done yesterday.
Yeah, it will happen.
Yeah,
take time.
Trust yourself.
Okay, I like that. Well, thanks for that.
It's okay.
So I'm really interested in hearing about you and your start. Can you take me back to the very beginning of your career?
Oh my goodness me, yeah. Well, I struck a deal with my parents. If I passed my A-levels, I didn't have to go to university, which is an ironic one because if I'd failed my A-levels, I wouldn't have been going to university anyway. And I went and I did the John Lewis management scheme, and that was supposed to be a year, and I just really enjoyed it, so I flew through it. So I was kind of done in 6 months, picked up 2 bonuses and went off travelling for 2 years. So it was a slightly odd start. Then went to work for News International and worked obviously in publishing, and worked client and agency side in publishing for News International, BBC, Telegraph Group. Hit a bit of a glass ceiling when I was in my mid to late 20s and just thought, you know what, I'm just going to freelance. There's more to life than newspapers and magazines. I'll get myself out there and just see what some of the different industries look like. And happened to find myself going for a job interview with BT up in Birmingham on a Friday night. And I think they were so impressed that I was prepared to come and be interviewed at 5 o'clock on a Friday night when I lived in southwest London. They gave me the job. I started the following Monday, and it was during the Six Nations, and I kept disappearing off to games. And they sidled up to me one day and said, "You seem to know a lot about rugby." It's like, I think so. We're sponsoring the Rugby World Cup, and this was in 1999. Would you like to join the sponsorship team as a freelance for a few months? It's like, heck, yes. And they kept me on, bless them, for 2 years doing all sorts of different sporting property sponsorships. Said to me at the end of it, you start your own agency and we'll keep using you. And so in the first instance, what I did, because at the time, everything in sport was about the tracksuits, not the suits. And so I set up the Sport Industry Awards and then used the money from that when I ran it for a year, and then used the money that resulted from that, set up a PR agency called ENS, and BT stuck with me and ran ENS for the thick end of 18, 20 years, but in the process of it saw that the single biggest thing changing sport was technology, and nobody was doing anything to celebrate it, recognise the good stuff, because as we know in sport there's an awful lot of snake oil sold. And so I thought, well, great, it will be a really nice addition to the agency to have this annual event that we can have fun at and celebrate this great whizzy new stuff. And the awards went from 0 to 100 miles an hour in about a second and a half. The first year we had entries from Brazil, India, America, all over. So we ran it for 2 years, almost a little bit informally. And I said to the guys, look, if we don't get our arms around this, we've obviously tapped into something so vibrant and so influential. If we don't get our arms around it, somebody's going to come along and steal our lunch. So we spent a few more years really developing the awards. And then 4 years ago, we pivoted the business so we really had that sports tech focus, set up a range of initiatives around it. So we set up the startups. Subsequently, we've set up things like the Sports Technology Annual Review, the Power List. We've got a global directory. And now the PR side of the business just went. So, yeah, cut us and we bleed sports tech, and we're now the STA Group.
It's amazing, really, that you spotted the emergence of tech and the importance of it in sport really, really early on.
Yeah. and if a couple of people said, well, how did you do it? It's like, I've no idea really, but I've done it a couple of times throughout my career. And I think it's just luck. You know, I always think people who don't attribute a degree of luck to wherever they've got to are deluded. You know, the planets have got to line up in your favour. But I think, again, it's being open-minded and just being passionate about the space that you're in and paying attention to what's around you. And you never know where the idea will spring from. But I couldn't tell you how I thought that one up, but I'm very glad I did. It's been a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, the Sports Technology Awards is a global celebration of everything tech innovation in the sports world. And at last year's event, last year's awards, Sport Buff won Best Fan Engagement Technology.
Indeed.
So we were thrilled by that. But yeah, you've touched on why you thought it was so important to do the awards. Going forward, why do you think it's so important to continue celebrating?
Well, I think in all honesty, I do think technology is the single biggest influencer on modern sport. I mean, sport survived the pandemic because of technology. And I think because it's an exciting area, it's a vibrant area, and it's an influential area. And the way so many facets are interlinked. So by that I mean broadcasters had to get smart about remote production because of the pandemic. As a result, they turned to a lot of OTT technology, and you talk to a lot of traditional broadcasters, and they've now almost made that switch to OTT, which in conjunction with that is very environmentally sound. So then you look at the whole sustainability piece. So all these facets are fascinating and aren't siloed. So I think for us to keep being important and relevant going forward, because there's an onus on us as well to do our jobs, right? We can't just sit back, build it and think people will come. We try and be very nimble about the categories that we introduce every year. So we've done a Tech for Good category. We've had a sponsorship, a sustainability category now for 3 or 4 years. So we've got to be. We also introduced a crypto, blockchain, and NFT category for this cycle. That's something that's only going to get bigger. And we enjoy looking at the space and seeing what we need to do to respond appropriately. But if anybody who doesn't evolve becomes irrelevant.
I want to talk about that more, actually. So how important is it for businesses, broadcasters and brands to stay tech forward in today's market if they want to continue and be successful in the future?
It's a fascinating point that you raise, in that I think woe betide the brand that isn't forward thinking. And I think more than that, a brand isn't a brand without the team behind it. And it's vital that the senior management keep themselves abreast of technology, even if it's just a working knowledge. It's all very well, one thing being able, somebody said to me, I've got to be able to ask the right questions. Yes, but that's only half the equation. You've got to be able to understand the answers. It's a bit like speaking a foreign language. It's all very well to say, how are you in French? But if you haven't got a clue what the person said to you, how on earth
one-sided.
Yeah, exactly. How do you go forward from that? So, and I think the other thing is that people employing C-suites in all brands or organisations across sport are going to become increasingly mindful that the leaders of those organisations need to be able to navigate their way around the tech landscape in whatever subsector that may exist, because it is so important for the organisation. Now, that's not necessarily an onus on the C-suite at the moment, and I think there's going to be a period where you can probably spoof it for a bit, but it's so exciting to see young talent in the sector come through who know this stuff. I mean, years ago we used to talk about digital natives. It's now tech natives. People who had a crypto wallet. They didn't have to go out and buy one just to see what it was about. They understand crypto. They understand NFTs, blockchains, whatever it is. And the most salient thing that's probably been said to me by any of the judges was, we invited David Dean to be a judge in the first couple of years we ran the awards. And he said, I'm in because I don't want to be a dinosaur. I thought, well, good for somebody of that stature to be that mindful of staying relevant, I thought was refreshing, and all power to him for being that open-minded.
The STA Group prides itself in being at the forefront of these key changes, challenges and emerging tech in this space. Over the years, what have been some of the most significant ones, do you feel?
Goodness, well, I mean, it's one of those things that it's a sector that is incredibly modish, in that when we started, everything was about participation. And then very quickly it became about wearables. Then it became about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And there are a few really fascinating industry trends. First of all, it is a sector that, horrible phrase, but it eats its young. You see a lot of startups with really exciting propositions, good people within it, much like yourselves, and the big guys swoop in and buy them. And you see this happen again and again. And so I think that the other thing that you see, so with the example of wearables, that was a really big thing very early on in our awards, and it's been a perennial favourite. But when we started, wearables were coming out and they were really pretty cookie cutter. And the difference between them is, were they a bit more waterproof, or did they come in fancy colours, or did they, the marginal differences were really marginal. And so as a result, you saw a few really big players drop out of the market, the sector rationalise, and it's really only been in the last 3 years that that particular section of the sector, that the wearable sector, has started to get really more interesting again. But it was a tribute to the guys who were good in it that they have kept going, and they have produced really impressive technologies in that time, and have done it having seen off a lot of really big competition.
How do you think technology will shape sport's future?
That's really interesting. I mean, I think that's such a big question, because as you see new technologies come through, there are so many facets to sport that can be influenced, and there are so many different technologies coming through. It's not a question of where do you start, but where do you stop? And I think, because we could talk about the metaverse, Web3, DAOs, crypto, blockchain, all those types of things. But also we can talk about very non-tech things like sustainability that technology is going to have to be very mindful of, because it's coming to light that NFTs are really, really environmentally questionable. So for companies that are all trying to get far more sustainable, but equally find the whole NFT concept very interesting, where do you strike the balance? You've got two powerful forces with opposing interests. Mm-hmm. So which wins? So I think there are going to be some things coming through there which will be interesting to witness.
So here at Sport Bath, we're all about fan engagement and gamification. So I wondered what your thoughts were on sort of fan engagement and gamification.
I think it's a fascinating space, and it's obviously very important. And I can remember hearing one of the, I think it was American sports commissioners saying, it's interesting because providing you are doing all the basics very well in serving the fan, you can play about with exceptional things or one-off things, and even if they don't work, they'll forgive you because they can see what you're trying to do and you do everything else very well. So I thought that's a really good rule of thumb. And it's exciting to push the boundaries of what's gone on. I mean, we don't get to vote on the awards. It's just something that I thought was inappropriate. Our judges vote, but we obviously get to see the judges' comments. And they get so excited when reading things like the Sports Buff remarks. It's like, clearly these guys have thumped a good few buttons here, because what you do is really impressive and exciting. And I think that's the thing. It's there's so much scope for what can be done, and if you're doing the bulk of everything that you do well, you can make the odd missed call and nobody minds because it comes from a good place.
Mm-hmm. Slightly different question. The upper echelons of the broadcast industry in this country have been a particularly male environment, something that you might have come across in your 20 plus years of experience. Do you think that's changing, or do you think there needs to be more work done?
It was one of those things. When I started off in sport, I was frequently one of fewer than 10 women in a room under any circumstance. And whilst it's changed a bit in sport, having then layered technology on top of sport, it's ridiculously male dominated. And we do things to play our part. We always try and make sure that our judging panels are 50-50. One year we had only female presenters at the awards just because we knew how many men were attending, and that then gave us the mandate to say, could you invite your female colleagues, do you think? Mm-hmm. But I think the industry has got a very, very long way to go. And one of the things that does frustrate me about the sports sector is that it's brilliant to see how much more female sport is being played and viewed, and things like This Girl Can and the work the broadcasters are doing to show more women's sport is fantastic, and hats off to them for that. However, there are loads of us like you and I who are sitting in the business suit side of the industry, and I wish the world had turned a bit faster and a bit further than it has in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know, you're a young woman in sport, how are you finding it?
It's a very topical question, working in production as a young female with predominantly male producers around me. It was just, I was working in sport. I was a woman. I never was made to feel different in any way, but it's not until you maybe get a little bit older and then you start looking around the room a bit more in different areas of broadcast and production where you start to see it starts to stand out. It's like when you start thinking about yellow minis and then you see them everywhere. So
it's one of those things, once you notice it you can't unsee it, can you?
Yeah exactly. But
it will change. I think we'll get there eventually, but as I said, I'm an impatient woman. I like to boil the ocean. I'm saddened that the sector hasn't moved further quicker, but I have every faith that it will get there. And the more we shout and the more we ask and there are some very, very, very fine male colleagues out there who absolutely champion our cause, and hats off to them. Thanks, chaps.
Yeah, we all need more
he for she's
male allies, isn't it? Yeah, champions. Yeah. STA Group is all about innovation, only for the innovative. Who has impressed you in the industry in terms of innovation?
Oh, is it fair for me to answer that? 'Cause I don't think I should be showing favourites.
Sure.
So let me refer you to the power list.
Yeah.
And it sounds so obvious. We launched the power list last year during lockdown, and because we thought, well, actually, who are the big players in this space? And it sounds so obvious to say it, and but the more tech the sport, the better they were at being technical. The more that culture of innovation ran through every aspect of their businesses or organisations. So, as you would expect, the team Emirates, the guys who competed for the America's Cup, they topped the power list the first year, and F1 topped it this year. But as you would expect, it's cycling, sailing, motorsport. Some of the work those guys are doing really, puts some of the other bigger sports to shame.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, a question I like to ask all the guests. As CEO of the STA Group, what do you do and how do you stay ahead of the game?
Oh, goodness. During the pandemic, your chief cook and bottle washer at times. But I think I see my role as making sure that my colleagues are happy, productive. We all share the vision. Everybody has their say. In terms of the macro picture, it's being abreast to all the key things that are going on in the industry, making sure that you're current, not being that dinosaur, and almost sort of everything in between, making sure it's strange. When you're running a business, you've got to work in the business and on the business, and they are different. And sometimes it's even checking out, like, why is this happening with the website, or how good is our database? Right the way through to, right, these are the categories, or let's talk to these people about judging, or how they see our work and what feedback they can give us.
What do you love most about what you do? Why are you so passionate about it?
I think because there's so much variety and it's almost evolving, and because it's such an immature part of a relatively immature sector, we've got a big fat blank canvas on which to paint. And it's so exciting being able to highlight brilliant minds and brilliant brands doing outstanding world-class work, and almost trying to be ahead of predicting what's going to be coming through next. I mean, there are disappointments in that as well, don't get me wrong. I mean, the fact that so little is done in femtech, and the fact that we unearth some big silos between the knowledge that sits within the people producing the technology, and then the people who potentially have the chance to influence sport. And it's just like, we really want to get you guys talking and understanding more about what each other does. And the opportunity to do that. Don't get me wrong, there are some incredibly visionary people who manage sport for us. And when you talk to some of the chief technology guys or the chief innovation guys in big sports, it's a joy to spend an hour with them. It really is. But yeah, there are things like people doing research on, so at football, women's necks are 25% weaker than men's. We've all seen the damage around head trauma, concussion that comes through heading a ball. Well, if it's causing that in men who are 25% stronger, why are women playing with the same ball? And yeah, there's work being done on that, but to me, there's a very obvious gap that should be, or a conversation that should be happening.
Do you see your role as almost like a link then between all these different conversations, all this research and changes in the sector happening?
Oh, I would love it to be, but I think that's probably that's slightly outside my reach as things stand. At the moment, what we do is give a platform to celebrate world-class innovation, and we shout about it loudly and we push it through our channels as they stand, and hopefully the rest of the sector gets to see that. But it's that classic thing, if we say we're only for the innovative, because it is about that mindset. People have got to want to be open, but as I say, we can lead horses to water.
How do people stay open then?
I think, well, it's just down to you. It's like however, what motivates anybody. So yeah, it's. I think when you see the potential and the power that technology, the knowledge it gives you, because it throws up a lot of data, the seismic change it can bring to your organisation, I would struggle as to why somebody couldn't get their head around that. Because I really like it. But I drank the Kool-Aid years ago.
Well, keep drinking it, because I love your passion, and congratulations on all the work that you're doing and continuing to do. So it's been really fantastic speaking to you. So thank you for your time, Rebecca.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.